Story 1. The Stranger's Perfume. Alice was a young woman full of life and curiosity, living in the bustling city of New York. Like many people her age, she used Tinder to meet new people. After several trivial conversations, one profile caught her attention. Daniel. He was charming, intelligent, and seemed to be exactly the type of person Alice was looking for. After weeks of intense conversations and online flirting, Alice and Daniel decided to meet. They arranged to meet at an elegant cafe downtown, a place Alice loved for its cozy and sophisticated atmosphere. On the night of the meeting, Alice dressed carefully, eager to finally meet Daniel. Arriving at the cafe, she was greeted with a charming smile and a warm hug. "Alice, you look wonderful," he said, with a natural charm that made her blush. As they talked, Alice couldn't help but notice Daniel's distinct perfume. It was a strong, almost hypnotic aroma that seemed to envelop her completely. At first, she found the perfume intriguing, but soon began to feel a slight unease. "What perfume are you wearing? It's different," she asked, trying to sound casual. Daniel smiled enigmatically. "It's a special formula, something unique." The conversation continued to flow, but Alice's discomfort grew. There was something in Daniel's eyes, something that made her uneasy. She decided to end the meeting early, making up an excuse about an early appointment the next day. "It was great meeting you, Daniel, but I think I need to go. We'll talk soon?" she said, standing up. "Of course, Alice. It was a pleasure. We'll see each other again soon," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Back at her apartment, Alice tried to distract herself, but Daniel's perfume seemed to cling to her clothes and thought. She went to bed feeling like she was being watched. That night, she had a terrible nightmare. She dreamt she was trapped in a dark room, with the smell of Daniel's perfume filling the air. She felt invisible hands touching her face and Daniel's voice whispering incomprehensible things in her ear. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. The following days were equally disturbing. The smell of the perfume appeared out of nowhere in her house, and Alice began to feel a constant presence, as if she were being followed. She decided to investigate more about Daniel, trying to find him on social media, but his profile seemed to have disappeared. Desperate, Alice began to search for clues that might explain what was happening. During one of her searches, she found an old online forum where people shared strange experiences with perfumes. One post in particular caught her attention. "The Predator's Perfume," read the title. The author described a man who used a unique perfume to attract his victims, involving them in dark rituals. Alice felt a chill reading that. The descriptions matched Daniel and his perfume. She needed to find out more. She continued reading and found a name that appeared several times: Dr. Moreira, an occult specialist who had studied similar cases. Without wasting time, Alice booked a consultation with Dr. Moreira, who received her in an office full of old books and strange artifacts. "You're dealing with something very dangerous," he said after hearing her story. Dr. Moreira explained that Daniel was probably using an enchanted perfume, created to control and manipulate his victim. This perfume is made with rare and macabre ingredients, intended for rituals of power. You need to protect yourself and get rid of anything that has been touched by that perfume. Alice returned home determined to follow Dr. Moreira's advice. She washed all her clothes, threw away everything that might have been contaminated by the perfume, and spread coarse salt around the house, an old method of protection against negative energy. That night, however, the nightmares returned with full force. She dreamt she was again in the dark room, but this time she saw Daniel performing a ritual, surrounded by strange symbols. She felt a sharp pain in her chest and woke up screaming, with a pentagram-shaped mark on her chest. Terrified, Alice went back to Dr. Moreira, who was alarmed when he saw the mark. "He's trying to bind you to him permanently. We need to act quickly." Together, they prepared a counter-ritual to break the bond. The ceremony was held in an old cemetery, a place chosen for its transitional energy between worlds. Dr. Moreira drew a circle of protection around Alice while she held a protection amulet. They began chanting ancient incantations, asking for protection and release. The air around Alice started to vibrate, and she felt Daniel's presence trying to break the circle. "He's here," he whispered, terrified. Dr. Moreira increased the intensity of the chants, and the presence began to recede. Alice felt the mark on her chest burn intensely before disappearing completely. With a final scream, Daniel's figure dissipated into the night. The ensuing silence was heavy, but finally Alice felt deep relief. Dr. Moreira smiled, tired but satisfied. "You're free now. He can't touch you anymore." Alice thanked Dr. Moreira profoundly and returned home, feeling exhausted but relieved. In the days that followed, the smell of the perfume disappeared, and the feeling of being watched was gone. Finally, Alice could sleep peacefully. The basement was dark and cold, with a musty, damp smell. Using his phone's flashlight, Lucas began exploring the space. That's when he found something that made his heart stop. An altar covered in strange symbols and old photographs. In the photos, he saw different people, all with expressions of fear and despair. Among the photos, Lucas found one that seemed recent. A photo of him, taken while he was sleeping. He felt a chill down his spine and heard footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw Clara standing at the basement entrance, her face serious and her eyes dark. "You shouldn't be here, Lucas," she said, her voice cold. "What is all this, Clara?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "Why is there a picture of me here?" Clara sighed, her eyes momentarily sad. "You wouldn't understand. Better if you leave before it's too late." Now gripped by fear, Lucas tried to leave the basement, but Clara blocked the way. "I can't let you leave like this," she said, pulling a sharp object from her waist. Desperate, Lucas pushed Clara hard and ran out of the basement. Clara followed him, shouting incomprehensible words. Lucas managed to reach his car and started the engine, speeding down the dirt road as Clara disappeared in the rearview mirror. He drove as fast as he could, his heart racing. He didn't stop until he reached a gas station, where he tried to calm down and think clearly. He grabbed his phone and tried to call the police, but there was no signal. He decided to return to the city and report everything to the local police. The authorities, initially skeptical, decided to investigate Clara's house. When they arrived, they found the house empty and no sign of Clara. However, the basement revealed the altar and photographs, confirming Lucas's story. The investigations revealed that Clara was connected to several disappearances in the region, and her true identity was unknown. Traumatized by the experience, Lucas decided to delete his Tinder profile and focus on his safety. He learned the lesson of never blindly trusting strangers met online and always investigating more before venturing into unknown places. The experience made him more cautious and vigilant, but also grateful for having managed to escape. Story 3. The Photographer. Sophie was a young aspiring model, full of dreams and hopes of one day reaching stardom. She lived in a big city and used social media to promote her work. Like many aspiring models, she often used Tinder to meet photographers and expand her portfolio. That's how she met Mark, a charming and charismatic photographer whose stunning photos convinced her to set up a meeting. Mark had an impeccable profile. His model photos were dazzling, the quality that showed evident talent. They talked for a few weeks, exchanging ideas about photographic styles and possible locations for shoots. Mark suggested a session in his studio, promising that he could help Sophie create an impressive portfolio. On the day of the meeting, Sophie was nervous but excited. Mark had given her an address in a secluded part of the city where he said his studio was located. Arriving at the location, Sophie found an old but well-preserved building. Mark was waiting at the door with a welcoming smile. "Welcome, Sophie. I'm so glad you came," said, leading her inside. The studio was spacious, with state-of-the-art equipment and several areas set up for different types of photos. Sophie was impressed with the organization and quality of the place. Mark offered her coffee and began to show some ideas for poses and outfit. "You have incredible potential, Sophie. I think we can create something really special today," he said while adjusting the lighting. The session started smoothly and professionally. Mark directed Sophie skillfully, suggesting poses and adjusting the lighting to get the best angles. However, as time went on, Sophie began to notice strange behavior from Mark. He became increasingly controlling, insisting on uncomfortable poses and making comments that left her uneasy. "Trust me, Sophie. I know what's best for these photos," he said, in a tone that brooked no argument. The feeling of discomfort grew. Sophie tried to focus and stay calm. She decided to continue the session, hoping the situation would improve. Mark suggested a break and offered her a glass of water. Sophie accepted, trying to relax. While resting, Sophie began to explore the studio more attentively. She then found a small room at the back, with the door slightly open. Curious, she peeked in and saw several photographs hanging on the walls. Photos were disturbing, showing models with expressions of fear and despair. Sophie's heart raced. Something was very wrong. She decided to confront Mark and leave the studio as quickly as possible. She returned to the main room where Mark was adjusting the camera. "Mark, I need to go. I'm not feeling well," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mark looked up, his expression changing to something darker. "It's okay, Sophie. Let's finish the session. We're almost there." "No, I really need to go," Sophie insisted, stepping back. Mark approached, blocking her way. "I said we're almost there. Let's finish." Sophie felt a growing panic. She tried to get around Mark, but he grabbed her arm tightly. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold and threatening. Adrenaline took over Sophie, and she fought to break free. She managed to push Mark, causing him to lose his balance for a moment. She ran towards the exit, but Mark quickly recovered and followed her. Sophie ran through the studio, trying to find a way out. She entered the small back room and locked the door behind her. Her breathing was heavy, and her heart was pounding uncontrollably. She looked around, searching for something to use as a weapon or to defend herself. Mark pounded on the door, his voice full of rage. "Open the door, Sophie. Don't make this worse for yourself." She found a metal bar used to adjust equipment and held it tightly, ready to defend herself. The sound of the door being forced echoed through the small room, increasing her fear. She decided she needed to call the police, but her phone was in her bag outside. "Please, someone help me," she screamed, hoping someone would hear. Mark finally broke down the door, entering with a furious expression. Sophie raised the metal bar, trying to appear braver than she felt. "Stay away from me, Mark. I'm calling the police." He laughed, cold and humorless sound. "You think you can threaten me, Sophie? No one will hear you." Without thinking twice, Sophie struck with the metal bar, hitting Mark on the arm. He screamed in pain and backed off, giving her an opportunity to escape. She ran past him and rushed back to the main room, grabbing her bag and phone. She ran out of the studio without looking back and called the police while running down the deserted street. "Please help me. I'm being chased. The address is 1234 Artists Street," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The police arrived quickly, and Sophie hid behind a parked car, watching as the officers entered the studio. Minutes later, they emerged with Mark in handcuffs, who looked at her with a mix of hatred and contempt. "You'll pay for this, Sophie," he shouted as he was taken away. The officers took Sophie to the station, where she recounted everything that had happened. They were shocked to hear her story and began to investigate Mark's studio. They discovered he was linked to several disappearances of models in the city, using Tinder to lure his victim. Sophie, despite the trauma, felt a profound relief knowing Mark was arrested and couldn't hurt anyone else. She decided to step away from modeling for a while, focusing on her emotional recovery. In the following months, Sophie received support from friends and family who helped her overcome the fear and anxiety. She also participated in awareness campaigns about the dangers of online dating, sharing her experience to warn other young women. She learned to be more cautious and to trust her instinct. The experience made her stronger and determined to move forward, but always with a vigilant eye on the world around her.